We good, folks? Alrighty, well, hello, folks. Good afternoon. Sorry for the little delay there. We lost some of our files on our computer, but I think we're about good to go here now. You folks all should know me by now. My name is Nick Mercer, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and Environmental Management at the University of Waterloo. I'll be chairing the session today on off-grid electricity generation, but I'm also a panelist, so I'm wearing a couple different hats. So I'm going to do my own presentation, and then I'm going to become the session chair. And then we'll hand over the floor to our friend Mr. Robert Apold from Natural Forces, Delia Warren, who's a student at MUN and represents Iron and Earth East, as well as concerned citizen and retired from Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, Mr. Bob Moulton. So I'll start the timer for my own benefit. So my doctoral research at the University of Waterloo focuses on energy planning with and for Inuit communities in Nunatsiavut, Labrador. From every isolated diesel community from Cartwright right on down to about Mary's Harbour and Lodge Bay. Throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, there's about 21 isolated diesel communities. And the vast majority of these communities, all with the exception right now of Ramia, rely on diesel. Almost exclusively, combined burning over 18 million liters of diesel fuel every single year. So the question becomes, why is this a challenge? Well, first and foremost, diesel is very expensive. The average Canadian consumer pays about 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. The average unsubsidized cost of electricity in an off-grid community in Canada is a staggering $1.30 a kilowatt hour. This is over 10 times more expensive than what a grid-connected consumer pays in Canada. We also know that diesel poses a huge risk of fuel spills and leaks. The government of Canada tells us that there's over 2,000 contaminated sites at or near Indigenous communities in Canada. And the vast majority of these sites, about 70%, are contaminated by diesel fuel. There we go. Diesel can also pose reliability challenges. In many communities, diesel generators are old, they're aging, and they're becoming unreliable. In Pekanjicum First Nation in Northern Ontario, the local school board loses about 20% of its educational time every single year due to blackouts at the local diesel generator. It takes high school students, due in part to these blackouts, upwards of an extra year to finish high school because of blackouts at the diesel plant. And I'd like to think there'd be, a national outrage if this happened at any urban community or grid-connected community in Canada. Now, conversely, renewable energy technologies are kind of promoted as a silver bullet to advance off-grid sustainability. But here's where I want to be very, very careful. As without legitimate processes of Indigenous engagement, Indigenous ownership, Indigenous control, renewable energy projects can actually create economic, environmental, and social tensions of their own. And one common example I like to point out is misalignment with community needs. Back in 2016, the Nunatsiavut government published an energy security plan. And what they found, and I quote, is the greatest energy security challenge in the territory is access to clean, affordable, and reliable heat. They found that upwards of 45–50% of the dwellings in the territory were inadequately heated. They also found that the vast majority of homes in each community, 80–90%, rely on wood as their primary source of heat. So as an example, if someone were to come in and build a large-scale wind farm or solar farm or hydroelectricity that was capable of providing electric heat, this would do very little to improve the most pressing energy-related need in the community, which is secure access to heating. It's a similar story on the south coast as well. It's predominantly wood heat. So electric heat doesn't really solve the most pressing energy-related challenge. Another issue that frequently comes up is job creation. Renewable energy technologies are frequently promoted to create jobs, but some emerging research has shown that renewable energy technologies can actually displace jobs in off-grid communities to the extent they displace jobs associated with diesel transportation, diesel storage, diesel operation, diesel sales. And sometimes these are some of the most important and only jobs available in isolated communities. So, does this mean we shouldn't pursue renewable energy projects in off-grid regions in Newfoundland and Labrador? No, absolutely not. But to have successful renewable energy projects, we need to implement legitimate processes of Indigenous engagement, Indigenous ownership, Indigenous control of sustainable energy technologies. Enter my research. Working with Inuit scholars, Dr. Debbie Martin from Fox Harbour and Amy Hudson from Black Tickle, we developed this. And what we call it is a four-right community energy planning framework. And essentially what we argue is that energy planning research with and for Nunatsiavut Inuit communities must be grounded in the worldviews of respect, reciprocity, relationships, and rights. The same principle that I talked about in my opening speech this morning. But this isn't enough. We also suggest that a sustainable energy project must never go ahead without the free, prior, and informed consent of the communities that we're working for. The next two stages of our framework kind of go hand in hand, generation side and household energy use. Right now across Canada, hybrid renewable energy technologies, your wind, your solar, they're really sexy. But without storage and system controls, these technologies are really only capable of displacing 10 to 20% of the diesel in an isolated community. It's at the household level, via changes in the way we use energy, efficiency upgrades, building upgrades. It's here we can displace 10, 20, 30, 40% of the diesel. So we argue that you have to focus on both. And finally, we have this idea of transition. We suggest it's only when energy planning practitioners can maintain these 4 Rs, build and maintain community cohesion and consent, assess the social and economic feasibility of supply-side and end-use energy technologies. It's only at this point where we should be able to make recommendations about which approaches are likely to concede. Does anyone think Muskrat Falls would have passed through this framework? So we were really lucky over the last year in that we actually got to test this framework. We partnered with the Nunatsiavut Community Council in 9 partner communities: Black Tickle, Fox Harbour, Norman Bay, Cartwright, Port Hope Simpson, Mary's Harbour, Lodge Bay, Charlottetown, and Pinson's Arm. So I've said that lots of times, right from Cartwright on down to Mary's Harbour and Lodge Bay. And we did community energy planning interviews. We were really lucky in that we got to sit around the kitchen tables of 211 community members and have a cup of tea or rum. And what our energy interviews sought to determine was, number one, what are the greatest energy-related needs in your community? Because there's no sense trying to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist. Number two, what is the future of your energy community? Would you like to stick with diesel, or would you be interested in moving into something new, wind, solar, tidal, wave? Number three, how are you using energy in your home currently, and how can we do that more efficiently? And number four, what is your motivation for the future of development? If a project was going to go ahead, how would you like to see it governed? What would you like to see this project achieve? So we had some really interesting findings in our research. First and foremost, communities in Southeast Labrador are not necessarily opposed to diesel generation. Community members told us loud and clear, hey, diesel creates really good jobs in our communities. For instance, in Black Tickle, diesel creates 3 full-time year-round permanent positions. In Fox Harbour, it's 2. Fox Harbour, St. Louis, it's 2 positions. Norman Bay, it's 1 position. These are high-paying, year-round, full-time jobs, and in many cases, these are some of the only full-time jobs that exist in those communities. Number 2, diesel is perceived as relatively reliable, especially in harsh northern climates. You know, every winter on the coast of Labrador, you get winds of 160 kilometers per hour. And for the most part, the diesel system is able to withstand that. And number 3 is the idea of comfort and familiarity. Community members told us straight up, don't fix what ain't broke. Now, community members also told us we are extremely concerned about our contributions to global climate change, and we are extremely concerned about the risks of fuel spills and leaks on our culture and on our sustenance activities. So does this mean we shouldn't pursue a new energy system? No, but it means that any new energy system must be built on the basis of employment, on reliability, and on comfort and familiarity. So that was one of our biggest findings. The next finding we had is social cohesion consent really only exists for 2 supply-side energy technologies in the territory, both wind development and solar development. These are abundant local resources. Community members perceive them as compatible with their cultural and sustenance activities, and they're relatively familiar with them. Everyone in Southeast Labrador has a solar panel on their cabin. Everyone in Southeast Labrador has a solar panel on their boat. These are not new, novel ideas. People in Nunatsiavut are already using these technologies. For virtually every other category we checked, there was too many concerns right now for a project to go ahead. Biomass. What will this do to our forest? Tidal. How will this affect our fishery? Wave. How will this affect the navigation of boats? Small-scale hydroelectricity. There is an exception in Mary's Harbour, which I'll touch on. But how will this affect the migration of salmon up our rivers? And finally, we had this category that community members absolutely did not want to see, large-scale hydroelectricity. That's like Muskrat Falls, right? Nuclear, that's like Homer Simpson, right? So the thing I want to point out to the developers in the room, this does not mean there's a free pass for wind and solar projects to proceed in these communities. Instead, community members told us, hey, we're interested in this, but we want to make sure the revenue stays in our community and it's not exported away. We want to make sure that locals are able to fix and maintain projects, that we don't have to bring in crews into St. John's every time the wind turbine starts working. We don't want a project to proceed if it's going to have detrimental impacts on avian mortality or it's going to be too loud in our community. And we certainly don't want a project to proceed if it can't perform in harsh weather conditions. So communities are certainly interested in both wind and solar development, but developers have a lot to prove still if they want to have successful projects in these communities. And finally was this idea of energy efficiency, and I'll just throw it out there that there is significantly more support in Southeast Labrador for energy efficiency technologies than there is for supply-side energy options. And I think this is for 4 key reasons. Number 1 is cost savings. When you put in an LED light bulb or you upgrade the insulation of your home, you actually save money yourself. Whereas if a company comes in and puts up a wind turbine or solar panel, there's no promise that this will actually lead to cost savings for the people in the community. Number 2 is this idea of incremental versus disruptive transitions. As I told you at the start of the presentation, community members actually kind of value the positive aspects of diesel. So why come in and bulldoze the diesel plant right away when we can all collectively take these small steps to incrementally improve our energy use? And the third was this idea of positive relationships. And I don't know if I see Jonathan Hudson in the crowd today, but 2 companies in particular, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, in partnership with Take Charge Summerhill, have done energy efficiency programming in Southeast Labrador communities for years. They go into the communities, they give away energy efficiency products for free. They offer rebates on energy efficiency measures. So you save money, you get a product for free, and you protect the environment. What's not to love about that type of program? Community members told us, if anything, let's expand this type of programming. So I will leave you with that to kind of help frame the discussion. And once again, just thank you to everybody who funded and supported this research. There's no individual Q&A component in this panel. So I'll hand everything off to Mr. Robert Apold from Natural Resources, and we'll continue from there. Thank you kindly. Yours had a bunch of numbers, right?
Beautiful.
You can use this mic too.
I'm going to try this one first. You always want to go like this because you're worried it's too loud. But so if I'm too loud, just wave your hands, I guess. Thanks very much, Nick. I love hearing a presentation that lines up perfectly with my presentation. So thank you for that. My name is Rob Apold, and I'm one of the principals at Natural Forces. And the first question always is, well, who are you guys? So that's what I just pressed the button, right? Which button do I press? There we go. Yeah. So we're a private independent power producer based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We've been active since 2001, and we're active across the country. Currently we have 2 wind projects in 50-50 partnerships with First Nations in BC. We have 2 projects in construction in New Brunswick, 50-50 partnerships with First Nations. And we have a 10-megawatt solar project in Saskatchewan. Can you guess it? It's 50-50 partnership with First Nations. I think that gives you a real bent to what we are formed, what we are about. We are about community projects. They might be big, they might be small, but they're community. It's very important to us. It's part of our ethos, and we're very proud of that. Just to give you a background of myself, in 2001, I started in the wind business. It makes me a grandfather in the wind business, which is funny to me. We were very successful, did a large corporate project, 169 megawatt wind farm in just outside Moulton, New Brunswick. It was great, wonderful, had a huge party. There were 4 people there. In 2012, we did a 4.6 megawatt project with a community group. There was 156 people there. And that's the difference. The impact of carbon reduction was much higher in Kent Hills, but it was just a bunch of corporate people standing around. Whereas when we did a community project, the whole community came out to support us. And that's what's really important, something that we corporate folks sometimes don't get, but I think our corporation really does, the importance of that. Okay, that was my spiel on community action. So I'll go into our project. 2017, I met a man named Al Green, who was a retired engineer. He built a hydro project in 1886, with Bob, when Bob first started at NLH. Bob's now retired, so it's been quite some time. He started that project. It never really worked very well. Wasn't very reliable. And in 2010, maybe 2007, 8, it actually got shut down because it caused a brownout, I believe. Something not good. Utility people don't like hearing words like that. It was a bad thing. So in 2017, they approached me and said, let's try to get this project back up and running. So we went up to NLH. They're very open to discussing it. So we revamped the project. And that was the start of what we did in Mary's Harbor. I should say that we got sponsored from NRCan and also very much supported by NLH throughout this whole process. So both those groups deserve a lot of praise for what is about to come out of this. So to go to our vision, what we want to do is we want to unlock the power of renewable energy up in these northern communities. And it's really important that these things get demonstrated before they're implemented in a big way. Why is that important? Well, because we feel communities give you one shot. They don't give you multiple shots. If you go up there and you get them excited and you bring a project and it doesn't work, the next person who comes behind you is going to have a real hard slog to get anything happening. And we are passionate about renewable energy, and we're passionate about getting carbon out of the environment. And this is the only way to do it, is to do it right. And so that's why our approach, we feel, is the best way, which is a demonstration approach. Demonstrate the community that you can bring value to them. Demonstrate that you can bring a project that they can rely upon. And then you will get success, not with them only, but with every other community. Because guess what? They all talk to each other. Everybody in the north talks to each other. And I can tell you, even when I go to St. Anthony, a friend of mine in Halifax who grew up in St. Anthony, her father tells me about how the Mary Harbor Hydro will never work. So I can tell you, this news travels quickly, and if you do not do it right, you're going to end up with egg on your face, and so will everybody in the industry. So how do we look at this? Well, we look at it very much like utility. We have to build the pyramid. The first part of the pyramid is safe, reliable, resilient energy. If you do not prove that, first of all, the utility will not let you on the grid. Second of all your customers are going to hate you. And third of all, your project's not going to make money. So really important. That is the bottom piece, and that's what we focus on primarily, number one. Number two is cost of energy. Cost of energy is the next thing that comes in line. It's not renewables, it's cost of energy, because if it costs more money, most people, it's a hard sell. It could be a little bit more expensive, but as soon as it really starts affecting them, they're going to go back to the old ways. The next is the efficiency of the delivery. So what do I mean by efficiency? Efficiency means how much is it going to affect their lifestyle. So if you have a wind turbine that's on top of their house, it's not really an efficient way to do it. They're going to be upset about that. It's not going to be accepted within the community. And then the final one is the source, is the renewable piece, which is the top of the pyramid, which is what we really are focused on for the end goal. But without the bottom piece, without building the foundation, you'll never get there. So what is our phased approach? How much time do I got? 3 minutes? Oh gosh, okay. We have, there's 3 phases here. First phase is the hydro development. So we have a 245 kilowatt hydro facility. It gets COD'd, commissioned this week, fingers crossed. It's going to have a dynamic control with NLH, and it's going to reduce diesel by 300,000 liters per year. So pretty happy about that. Phase 2 is what we are starting now, solar and storage. There's going to be a solar plant built up there, 245 kilowatt solar, and then also a 1 megawatt storage, which will be lithium ion on site. The idea there is to make sure that we don't have to ever spill because there's a minimum load that the diesels have to run at. We want to make sure that we can capture all that energy. But phase 3 is the most important, which is what I'm really looking forward to. And that's that at one time during the night, shut the diesels off and make the battery the prime mover for the system. That's the ultimate goal. Because if we can prove that the grid works with storage being the prime mover and diesel just being an energy source, all of a sudden you've switched it. Because now they can still have the reliability of the diesel. Everybody's there with the diesel just in case. But now you can add other resources. You can put wind, you can add more solar, you can make the storage, the hydro a bit more. And that's where we're trying to really get to. I'm gonna pass over this one. This is the, you know what, wind turbines are much more exciting to show. Hydro facilities, not so much. Anyways, this is a picture of a solar panel. But that tells you a little bit, 223, sorry, I spoke wrong, kilowatt DC. 594 bifacial panels and fixed tilt. And really excited about it. It's going to be a great project for the solar. The storage facility, it's, again, very boring pictures, but the beauty of this storage system is that we can add more storage to it. So we just have to put more batteries up there, get more storage, allow us to run longer without the diesel. Very exciting. You're going to hold me to the, I have the mic. So what are we going to do here? What do we want to do at the end? So the number one thing is that we have to work in concert with everybody. So we have to work with the community, we have to work with the utility, and we've got to work with government. And all four of us, if we work all together, we're going to end up with a long-term viable opportunity. The problem is that if you don't work with all the stakeholders that are in the room, what happens is somebody gets upset, you miss something because we don't know everything. What do I know about Mary's Harbor? I know quite a bit now, but when I first started, I had no knowledge of what was going on up there. I didn't know the people, I didn't know what their concerns were. But now, as we go further and further down the line, as we walk together down the path, we get a much better result. Okay. This one is, what do I want to do in the end? So what I want to see happen is have a successful demonstration of the storage project. Once the successful demonstration of the storage project is done, it can be expanded. We expand it, and we make the battery storage the prime mover for the community. Diesel doesn't change, the people don't change. Now we have it so that we can add other resources. All of a sudden, if the government wanted to go out, if the community wanted to go out, I believe it should be the community, says, I want more renewable to come in. They can go out and say, I'd like to put more solar out here. That comes into the storage, it displaces more of the diesel, and we continue to move that needle. So instead of being at 30% renewable, we move to 50%, to 70%, and then hopefully 90 or plus. And that's really what we want to do. It's easy to do if you follow a simple, slow process so everybody's comfortable with it. So I'd love to talk more, but Nick's really looking at me funny. So anyways, thanks very much.
Yeah, I guess I should address this right at the top on our kind of social acceptance writing. Small scale hydro was right in the middle, and I said, don't do this. However, the reason we invited Robert in natural forces is because in Mary's Harbor and Lodge Bay, small scale hydro had the highest social acceptance rating amongst any community that we worked in. It was actually approaching that wind and solar kind of community cohesion and consent. So we really wanted to hear from the developer and their experience and their demonstration approach to get people on board. So thank you very much for your contribution, Robert. I'll now hand the mic off to Bob. My understanding, Bob, is you do not have PowerPoint slides. So did you want to use this mic or this mic?
I'll use that one.
Okay, perfect. I'll put up a presentation background for you. There you go.
Hi, okay, this mic. Yeah, I decided not to have a presentation. I've got 3 or 4 major points. I'm coming at it from a different angle than Nick and Rob have, and just had 3 or 4 major points. So I said, you'll have to listen to me rather than trying to read off of the screen. So as I said before, my name is first, now I thank the organizers for inviting me to this. My name is Bob Moulton. I'm an electrical engineer by training. I worked for Hydro for over 30 years in the generation and rural planning department. So I've been involved with providing electricity to off-grid communities throughout that entire career in one form or another. I am retired and I'm not representing Hydro at this conference, but my experience does let me provide the utility view on this subject. And just to say, any opinions expressed are my own. So I really got involved with carbon emission reductions following Kyoto in 1997. Canada made reduction commitments. So when they came home from the conference, the federal government had to say, how are we going to spread these emissions reductions across Canada by province and by industry? And we spent a lot of time, literally years, probably over 10 years, had a lot of meetings with representatives from utilities all across Canada, and in the end, without much to show for it. It was a good learning experience. But one thing I did learn out of this that is really applicable to this is that because emissions reductions cost, every utility, every industry spent a lot of their time trying to demonstrate how they had already done their share, or at least contributed lots, and that was everybody else who needed to do most of the contributions. And that's one of the challenges in all this. Everybody, we're here, we're all agreeing that stuff needs to be done, and one of the things of this conference is looking at how we should do it, but sometimes when the rubber hits the road, then it's going to be who should do it. And you get, well, we've done our share. No, it should be this other industry sector or this other group that should do it. So that's something you really got to try to avoid. I worked at a lot of what I call decarbonization, but mostly it was renewable energy projects in my career at Hydro. I was probably one of the authors of the request for proposal, the RFP, that led to the St. Lawrence wind project, and then farther to the Fremuse wind project that a number of us are going to go down and see tomorrow. Lots of projects within the isolated systems, as Rob just talked about, the first and second iterations of the Marys Harbour Hydro. Putting a commercial wind farm in an off-grid community in Ramya. There's been a commercial entity operating there since 2005, and I think it's really one of the few private commercial wind developers that has been successful in off-grid communities in Canada. We did Marys Harbour. We also did a district heating project using waste heat from the diesel plant to heat buildings, and some of the other things described there today. For example, in the Lanzalou system, which go from Red Bay from Lanse-Claire to Marys Harbour, Hydro-Quebec they decided to get rid of all the diesel plants on the lower North Shore, so they built a big hydro plant, 21 megawatts, connected all the things, and they had surplus power. We were only 3 kilometers from their system, so we built an interconnection, and on the Lanzalou system for the last 23, 24, 25 years, 95% of the diesel or the power has been supplied by renewable power, and it's been displacing diesel power, and we also save some money. So in all that time, what lessons have I learned? Well, one of the things that have come up in the last two speakers, one of the biggest things is collaboration. You gotta have your collaboration with the communities, with the governments, provincial, federal, Indigenous, with the utility, with the Public Utilities Board. You can't just go in and try to impose things. You need to talk to people. And I think in a lot of cases, they may even not necessarily agree at the end, but at least if they've been able to have their say and say that I've been heard, a lot of times that goes a long way. One of the other things in looking at doing decarbonizing off-grid communities, you look at feasibility. But when we say feasibility, there's a lot of different facets to it. From a technical feasibility point of view, we can decarbonize. We can put renewable energy and supply all the power in all of the diesel communities with renewable energy. That's very within our grasp today. Technically, that's not a big issue. But then you also got to look at economic feasibility. From from a utility point of view, hydro's a crown corporation. And one of hydro's biggest challenges to reducing carbon, decarbonization in the off-grid communities is that hydro has a mandate to provide reliable power at least cost. And if hydro wants to recover costs, it has to demonstrate to the Public Utilities Board that the source of power provided is least cost. There's no preference for low or zero carbon sources. It was one of my pet peeves throughout my entire career. As long as environmental regs are met, that's fine. And by law, the Electric Power Control Act, it's the Public Utilities Board mandate to ensure that hydro does this. So when we're looking at, or when hydro was looking at, projects, they had to be least cost. It didn't make any difference as long as they met regulations, they had to be least cost. So one of the big things, if we want to decarbonize the off-grid communities, we may have to allow hydro to pay more for power, either in what the generation sources that they build, or buy it from private developers. And right now, this would probably require a change in provincial legislation. So another thing, systems have to be reliable, and reliability is expensive. Currently, wind and solar are intermittent, and small hydro may or may not be. So we can look at going in and, one of the things you need, I'll say, to firm up the power is, today, battery storage is probably the most thing. We can look at going in and say, do we replace the diesels with 100% renewable? Or I think I've read the sweet spot is probably 80% renewable and probably 20% diesel backup. So one of the things is, do you go 80% of the way and save funds that you can spend somewhere else, or do you go 100%? I think that's one of the areas we need to look at. Much work needs to be done to find this sweet spot. And coming from a utility background, and we're talking, Robin, they've done a good idea in other places, and I think Rob said this. If you're dealing with a utility to get a project approved, it's going to be a tough slog. Because at the end of the day, if the project doesn't work and the lights go out, it's going to be the utility up before the microphone taking the responsibility. But it can be done. And the process that Rob has just described is a very, very, very good process. That's how, if you want to deal with the utilities, you want to deal with government, you want to get projects done, that's kind of the process that you got to go through. Start with reliability and build your way up. Anyway, that's a number of lessons. I could talk about a lot more. Going through preparing for this, I had to cut back a bit. But anyway, we can go farther into some of these discussions during the Q&A and during the breakout sessions.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your
you.
comments, Bob. I've got to say, oftentimes as a researcher and an advocate, it's normally with the utilities where you run into the most tension. But Bob and I, as far as utilities go, we seem to be getting along quite well. So thank you very much, sir. With that, I'll present our final panelist, Delia Warren, who's doing her Master's of Business Administration at MUN and is the Executive Director of Iron Earth East and a co-chair of this little gathering. So, Delia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nick. So this is exciting for me because usually when I'm up in front of a crowd talking about renewable energy, it's because of my work with Iron Earth East. However, I also now hold a job with a renewable energy company called SW Energy. So I'm actually looking at this from the inside now, which has afforded me excellent perspective and has really benefited from some of the work I've done. So today I'm going to talk about a study that I did as part of my MBA coursework into the business case for renewables in off-grid communities. So as part of it's a course-based MBA program. We get to do a double credit 2-course research project if we want. I chose to do it into renewable energy in off-grid communities because it's something I was very passionate about, and I wanted to kind of put this least cost, reliable energy thing to the test with NL Hydro and see, is this really the least cost option, these diesel plants? So unfortunately, as Nick mentioned, it's important to involve the community and the community members' opinions and desires in these types of study. I absolutely did not do that. This was a research project using secondary data available through NL Hydro, through various government sources, from the internet, and also I did a bunch of expert interviews, all anonymous, with people from the industry, from renewable energy, from government. However, there were no community member interviews. This is solely looking at the business case for integrating renewable, or I call it alternative energy, in this study. So I just want to talk about the study itself and then some of the results, because that's kind of what I feel is relevant to our conversation here today. So I started from the principle of NL Hydro having a mandate to provide reliable least cost electricity. And I wanted to look at the diesel communities in Newfoundland and Labrador. I narrowed it down to the towns of Nain, Hopedale, and Makkovik based on the availability of information, so the generation and demand data from the communities, and the fact that these communities had anticipated growth in electrical consumption over the next 5 years, which was determined to be an important factor in looking at putting investment into these communities. I looked at 3 or 4 different technologies. The base case for just diesel, so, par for the course, integration of solar, integration of wind, and integration of storage. And basically I looked at those because they were it just lines up with Nick's study. They had the highest positive public perception. I didn't know that at the time. I just wanted to be able to make more general assumptions based on my research for other communities. And with small and medium scale hydro, you really need that hydro resource, which isn't always there, but the sun shines and the wind blows everywhere. So another baseline assumption for this study is the price of diesel increasing steadily over time. And as you can see, this is a fairly linear graph. That's a very standard assumption, and it's based on projections from NL Hydro. So the first thing I looked at before going into this study, and these are just kind of things that, similar to what Nick mentioned, there are issues and barriers that are surrounding integrating renewable energy technologies into these diesel systems. For the communities themselves, Nick mentioned, and the Nunatsiavut Energy Security Plan factors heavily into this, heating and security in the homes, demand side management, so that means a lot of the homes in these communities could use insulation upgrades, energy efficiency retrofits, that kind of thing, to reduce the actual demand for electricity. And that's actually stated as one of the first steps before implementing any renewable energy system. But if you're looking at utility scale renewable, it's especially important. Of course, reliability. Bob mentioned, these systems are dependent on intermittent generation, so you need a system that is reliable. Some communities mentioned that their inability to increase their electrical demand had stifled growth opportunities within the community. So that was something that I thought was really interesting, not just to consider the projected demand for electricity in the communities, but the projected demand if they could expand, say, a manufacturing sector or another type of economic stimulus opportunity. And then ownership. So this is really tied into the community perception and the acceptance of these technologies in the community, because like Nick said, it's important to keep the financial benefits of those systems in the community. In terms of barriers, and it seems like all of our presentations here support each other well, energy storage is clearly an issue. Intermittency and integration, obviously diesel generators need to run between a certain range of values all the time to avoid wear and tear on the system and make sure that they're always in operating condition. So this is something that had to be taken into consideration. But government policy, sunk costs, and rate structure were very relevant to this study because it is the rate structure, which is based on government policy, that has put these communities in this kind of precarious energy situation. I'm not sure if a lot of people are familiar with the way off-grid communities are charged for their power, but there's basically a block system whereby they pay a certain amount per kilowatt hour up to a certain level, and then over and above that, they're charged a lot more. So it's basically, I think, 1,000 kilowatt hours per month Above that, the rate really skyrockets, which makes it prohibitive to use things like electric heating in people's homes, and it's built that way. It's built to price out those options for people in these communities. So that rate structure is complicated because it means that the people in the communities don't actually see the full cost of the power, because the first block is highly subsidized by the government and by other ratepayers. And then above that, they pay way more than the Island Interconnected Rate or the Labrador Interconnected Rate, and that causes a lot of other issues. So these weren't really the focus of my research, but it's kind of adjacent issues that do play into the research that I did and that are very important in the discussion of off-grid communities. So I used a simulation software called Homer Pro. I tried to do a business case analysis to determine what the least cost option would be in terms of combining all these generating technologies, but I'm also a mechanical engineer, so I had to make it very complicated and use a simulation program to consider all the different combinations. So one thing that's great about Homer is it does optimization for you. You basically plug in all the different technologies that you want to be considered, and it comes out with thousands of combinations of percentages of different generating technologies, and then spits out a cost of energy based on the combination of those technologies. So I looked at wind power, but various size wind turbines between 20 kilowatt wind turbines and 100 kilowatt wind turbines ended up being what was optimum for this particular study, because the generation, the demand for electricity in these communities is not super high compared to, you know, a city like St. John's or a larger town. For storage, I considered lithium-ion batteries, the Tesla Power Pack batteries. For solar, just generic quantities of solar modules were considered. And so this is just the different combinations. So the base case was diesel. I validated this against real numbers from the communities for what they consumed and what they spent. And then it goes right up to hybrid systems with solar and diesel, wind and diesel, various amounts of storage, and it basically optimizes for the amount of storage required, the amount of solar, etc. So this is the big overview of the results. The report was about 150 pages, so I've kind of summarized it into this table here. But the main takeaway was that the least cost solution really did involve a combination of technologies. Wind, solar, diesel, and storage, or wind, diesel, and storage were the primary low-cost options for these energy solutions for the towns. Now, like Bob said, I have to address the fact that just because it's feasible doesn't mean it can be implemented. But this does show that when you combine these technologies, you can get a lower cost of electricity for these towns. Now, I didn't consider, basically the cost of these diesel generator sets were very difficult to generalize. So I basically did this cost comparison on the basis of fuel savings, because even if you're using a hybrid system, you still need to maintain your diesel generators. So you're not actually saving any money on the equipment itself, but you are saving money on fuel. So as you can see here, these percentages of renewable fractions are fairly high compared to what a lot of people say is possible, 49, 61, and 60%. And that's because there is some storage involved here. But in Nain, it's over $1 million of fuel savings per year, so it's significant. And looking at the discounted payback periods, so how much does this equipment and technology cost versus how long until you manage to pay it back with the savings that you achieve? And as you can see here, in my research, a lot of the people in the industry I spoke to said an acceptable payback period would be about 15 years. Even with my highest installed cost assumption for wind turbines, I looked at a range of $7 to $15 per watt, which for those of you that are in the industry, this is a high number, but we're looking at installing in rural, isolated environments, so you would consider a higher cost. But even with the highest cost assumption, the payback period is 12.4 years. So still within what is considered acceptable for these types of systems. So in conclusion, there is a business case that exists for hybrid renewable energy systems in all communities considered when you consider the cost of energy, COE, the payback period, and the dollar per kilowatt hour generated. The case for 100% renewable energy still remains cost prohibitive. However, if you do factor in the will of the community, the value of decarbonization, this type of things that don't necessarily have a monetary value, it could change the scale. I also noted that the higher the demand requirements for the community, the lower the cost of energy, and that the desires of community members must be considered and used to evaluate any changes in energy systems. And then just to follow up with this, in terms of future research and the affordability overall of these systems, it's important to consider the value of targeted incentives. For instance, the Northern Reach program I know has been used to stimulate some renewable energy projects in the north. The benefits of combined heat and power, very feasible, it's already been done. Use waste heat to provide heat, focus on the heat security piece. And then the impacts of generated distribution and storage. So what if everyone had their own Tesla Powerwall and their own generation system on the roof? That could be a much more cost-effective option. Benefits would be seen directly at the household level, and it could be a way to get to that real least cost, most reliable option. So there's lots of things to consider. All in all, it was a fascinating study, many, many hours of my life, but I enjoyed every second. So thank you very much.
Alrighty, well, Delia, Robert, Bob, that concludes the session panel portion of the off-grid electricity session. However, what we'll do right now is very similar to what we did this morning, whereas we'll take 2 or 3 minutes. We'll ask you folks to get together in tables of maybe 7 or 8, however many you can seem to fit in, and perhaps peer review some questions that you have for the panel. Throw some ideas around your table, see what the best form questions are, and at that point we'll enter a 10-minute Q&A before we do the Citizens Assembly component. So please peer review some questions. Thank you, folks. That was great. We played off each other quite well.
I had heard about the work that was being done, but I never had a full overview. Nobody wants to be the first one to try it. Yeah. And it is hard, you know, like, even if it's a proven technology somewhere, it's still a new region, there's local regional challenges.
I've published a couple of reports. Yeah. So my dissertation has been done, but we immediately published preliminary results. Great. We published one report, which includes black fox river Normandy, which they have the most pressing. Yeah. Black river doesn't have fuel sources. Yeah, right. And then for the 6 new carbon communities down the lodge, we just published so they're publicly available. Yeah, that's great. But I've mentioned this before, but the acceptance rating for small hydro and dairy carbon was actually respectable compared to every other community. This is why we're not going.
I mean, even if the system wasn't super reliable before, they still had a historical familiarity with it, right?
And another big thing too is a lot of community members perceive it as a wasted asset. That's why it's actually sitting there.
They put the plan up, except for that biggest last thing where it really cost about $1 billion. Customers didn't see that. Yeah. When it was supply electricity, that didn't affect them.
And like I said, with wind and solar, just because there was relatively high social acceptance of mini hydro, that's what they call it in the community. Yeah. Doesn't mean there weren't questions either. No, exactly. We detailed it in the report. Okay, I think we're still opening stuff. Alrighty, folks, well, we'll give you another few seconds there, and then perhaps we'll open things up to our panel members. I have officially removed myself from the panel, so I told everyone that I made all kinds of accusations and ideas, and now I'm going to let them deal with it. So. You're welcome, folks. Alrighty, well with that, we'll take about 10 minutes and open this up to questions. It's 2:55 right now, so we have our first question right here. And I'll give you the mic and ask you to use it so people listening at home can partake as well.
So I think I'm a little concerned that we're going off topic here, but I'm very interested in hearing what the panelists here have to say about the potential for some of these renewable resources and small-scale energy projects on the grid in this province as opposed to just off the grid. Any comments, any input on that would be very welcome, yeah.
So perhaps the way we can frame this to make sure that we're staying on topic is, has there been any experience on the island of Newfoundland or the Labrador connected grid with distributed renewable energy resources? And what can we learn that's applicable for off-grid communities?
Okay. And there has been, there's, for example, last year out on the west coast, there was a biogas farm used the biogas from its manure and they're using that to produce 400 or 500 kilowatts of electricity. And there's a number of other ones. But with the current situation, with Muskrat Falls coming in, everything else, there will be a surplus of electricity. So what's really going to happen is any additional electricity that's produced, in essence, the only market for it is to be sold off the island somewhere else. So from that point of view, its value is what you can get for it selling it off the island. So it's not, I suppose, that you can't do them, except, well, there is a bit of a government moratorium on small hydro, but it's not so much that you can't do it. It's, technically it's feasible. Economically, right now, it's not going to be.
I'll follow up there. So yeah, net metering is a program that does exist. That basically means you can install solar or wind on your property connected to the grid and benefit from cost savings on your bill at the end of the year. If you produce a surplus, you'll actually get a credit from the utility company, so through NL Hydro. And that's a program that is gaining more familiarity. It's only been allowed in Newfoundland and Labrador for about 2 years, but it can be a really great way for people to save on their own electricity bill. I know the current government said that there's going to be a cap on the price of electricity as it increases with Muskrat Falls coming online. And, it is true that we will have a surplus of electricity once Muskrat Falls comes online. But, I like to think of things from an individual perspective as well, and you've got to take care of your own household. And I think that distributed energy through the net metering program is a great way to own your own energy production and create value in your home. And there's certainly a lot of options for that. I think it would be a really great model to follow in these smaller communities that depend on diesel generation as a way to offset the amount of diesel that's required. There's always balance of energy issues when you're putting more energy on the grid, but currently our net metering program is limited at 100 kilowatts per meter, so that kind of takes care of that. But in terms of distributed scale or utility scale energy generation projects getting tied to the grid right now, unless you've got a power purchase agreement, then it's really not a possibility.
I agree with everything you guys just said. So I would say low to do small. Depends on what your definition of small is. But for your house, yes, you can do that. Just to pivot to do off-grid, this is one of the issues that I really believe the utility has to pay attention to, because eventually what happens in these small off-grid communities is that people will start to say, you know what, I could do it for the same price at home, and I can just put a battery in there, and I don't have to rely on their grid. And when that starts happening, you start fluctuating it, and it causes more issues with their diesel. That's why you're not allowed to net meter in the off-grid communities. But eventually people will just start clicking off. And that's a real issue that's gonna come. And that's why we feel like our project's very important, so that NLH understands what's coming down the line, and NLH is prepared for it. Because that's the biggest issue here, is that the utility has no money because they are squeezed like crazy by government. So then they can't look to the future. They can't invest in the future of understanding what's going on. And that's why we really feel a project like ours is important, because it allows NLH, using our money to find out what the future could look like.
Now, I know Bob, I think Bob has a couple clarification points. Bob, can I propose this? We take a question to make sure we stay focused on off-grid. I'll hand it to you first, so then you can take care of the clarification and we stay on off-grid. Okay, go ahead.
Just to say that no, net metering is allowed in the off-grid
so.
communities, as long as it was from the start when the policy was there. But again, you have the technical issues that you mentioned, and yeah, from the economics, from a consumer, if you're just displacing your household electricity, yeah, what you're getting back is what you're paying on your bill. Mm-hmm. If you were to sell it to hydro, what you're going to get is what hydro can get to sell it on the market. Mm-hmm. So that's, yeah, so you're probably talking now 2, 3, 4 cents versus 13, 14, whatever it goes to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for the clarification, Bob. We'll take another question, for a peer-reviewed question from the room for the panel. Anyone else dying to ask one? Can I hand you the mic so our listeners can?
Thanks. Thanks for the panel, for great inspiring talks. Especially with Delia, your talk, when I saw all the different energy mixes you were looking at, basically wind, solar, I recognized a distinct lack of biomass there, and that came up basically as one of the last keywords here in our discussion. Would you be able to comment on that a little bit? Because from what I know, biomass would help us actually transition or help the transitioning away from from diesel. Would solve certain issues with regard to storage and so on and so on and so on.
So as I mentioned, one of the main reasons I just chose wind and solar primarily was just to simplify the analysis. That would have added probably another, I don't know how many, like 5 or 6 load cases. But Nick did allude to biomass as an energy source for these communities, and it is used in form of wood for burning in the majority of these communities as a primary, or one of the primary sources for heating, at least. But people are concerned about deforestation as a result. There's also issues to access and cost for people that can't actually go and secure the biomass for themselves in their homes. So it comes back to the reliability and then, of course, as well, the least cost per unit energy. It could be, it is an option. It's already integrated in these communities. It's, the electric heating is priced out by the rate structure, and so people supplement with biomass. And it's definitely something that could be considered, but that's why I didn't consider it in my study.
Just got a slight comment as well. Were you using biomass to produce electricity? Were you?
More in the sense of anaerobic digestion or things like that, basically instead of using wood or having really a chemical process that
Okay.
gives us gasification.
Because just to say, we in Hydro did build a wood-fired generating plant, a 5-megawatt wood-fired generating plant in Roddington. It served the system when Roddington, Mainbrook, St. Anthony were off-grid communities. So that operated in the early 90s until the system was connected to the island grid, and at that point it wasn't feasible. And the other problem, again, it just goes back to cost. Biomass, some parts of Labrador, for wood example, there's lots, some there's not. But I mean, just to say, a lot of the wood that was cut out in Muskrat Falls is sitting up alongside the road, rotting away up in Labrador. Anybody can go and take it, but it's nobody obviously has got a value that they can make money off it.
Okay, well, with that, we'll take one more question, I suppose, and then we'll move on to the Citizens Assembly component of the panel. So I'll pass the microphone off here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Alana. I'm just curious if you could provide some clarification. 'Cause as I understand it, there's actually a cap when it comes to net metering. There is a cap on the amount that an individual can produce themselves. And I know we're talking off-grid, but when it comes to an interconnected grid, people are unable to sell it back to the utility. That's my understanding. I don't know if it's current legislation, but that's what the provincial government is doing right now. And I'm not sure if any of you know anything about that, if you could speak to that.
So the household or per meter cap is 100 kilowatts. You're also limited with how much you can actually install based on your historical energy demand. So you basically can't create a power plant at your house, but you can get paid back for the excess energy that you generate. So if your net energy consumption is lower than what you produced, you will get paid for that. But like Bob said, the rate is not very high, but you could offset your own energy usage. Now, the entire program has a 5 megawatt cap, which I feel is more significant. And every time I bring it up, people, the powers that be say, well, let's get there first. But the issue is that, and I know we're kind of off track here, Nick, but I'm going to say it anyways.
Very good.
The issue is that stifles economic development because it's not appropriate for a business to plan to grow when there is a limit on how much business is available to them. I know that there is more than 5 megawatts available on the Newfoundland grid. I also know that Newfoundland and Labrador grid. I also know that with Muskrat Falls, it is in our interest to pay off that project and to use that electricity. So, as you can all see, the electricity situation in Newfoundland and Labrador on and off grid is very complicated and multifaceted.
Final word goes to Bob before we break into the Citizens Assembly.
You know, again, no, the idea with the program with net metering, I was involved with it, is to limit it to people can displace, the idea they can displace their own power, but not to the point selling it back to the grid. Unlike most jurisdictions across Canada, they wanted all the renewable power they could get because their emissions limited. Right now on the island, you know, we're producing 80 to 85% of the power we're producing for electricity is from renewable sources, and it'll be like 98% when we finish. So the idea was if we were getting a lot of power sold back, again, after the interconnection, we'd only end up being able to sell it for what we could get for it on the market. Part two, the 5 megawatt cap really was put in place, not so much to limit it. What we were scared of, again, is you don't know what is going to happen in the future. Maybe the federal government comes out and say, we're going to subsidize solar panels to 75%. All of a sudden we have 5,000 applications for net metering, which we would not be able to handle. And that did happen in Ontario. So the idea was to say, yep, let's get there first. And when we got there, if we showed any signs of starting to get near it, then we look at it and say, okay, what can we increase it to? But it was more put there as a backstop to, if something happened that we hadn't foreseen, to give us a chance to prepare to actually handle it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that leaves us off at a very good place to springboard into the next component of the session, which is the Citizens Assembly. So we all seem to agree as panelists that diesel is quite expensive. We also seem to all be on the same page that renewables, in many instances, are cost competitive, depending on how much penetration you want to reach on the system. The conversation that really sparked a lot of discussion about our panelists is how we get there. Is it net metering? Is it enhanced net metering? What particular generation sources are going to help us get there? Be it biofuels, wood, solar, energy efficiency, demand-side approaches. So I think this is a really good, productive place for us to start the Citizens Assembly. So if everyone recalls, this is what Brett walked us through at the start of the day for the brainstorming session with our what, our how, and our plus minus, and our interesting. We're a little bit tight on our time, so instead of dedicating 15 minutes to each session, what I think would probably be a good first step would perhaps to take 20 minutes to combine the what and the how. So to get instant tables wherever we have our boards, to begin thinking about these SMART goals that we can set for the off-grid electricity section, as well to begin thinking how we can begin to achieve those goals. So we have about 20 minutes to start handling that right now. So if everyone wants to break off into tables with our markers, we can get underway.